everybody, today we're going to rock on some compost tea. It's that time of year where everything's starting to sprout out, things are growing really well. It's time to get a little nutrient boost out there. Certainly we could take some granular compost, we could take any sort of additive nutrient we'd like and put it around the soil surface. It takes a little while for that to penetrate down into the soil. You need usually some irrigation, some rain to kind of make that happen. So you could be somewhere around 3 weeks when you apply a granular nutrient before it actually gets into the plant roots to help the plant grow better. If we were to take and soak this and turn it into a liquid form, then we can put a liquid onto the soil, and that can really boost the speed of which the nutrients can get down to the plant roots because it's already water, it's already aqueous, so it can get down into the soil fissures a little bit better. Also, because it's in a liquid form, it's easier for the plants to absorb the nutrients through their root hairs. So what we're going to do is take that a step further, though, because in compost tea brewing, you're actually adding air to the brewing process. So you're not only taking a aggregate granular material to turn into a liquid form, but you're also taking all the available microbiology and stimulating, propagating, building it in more populations to be to your advantage. So with a compost tea that has had good aeration, we know it's aerobic and it's a good healthy product. So you can put that nutrient on the surface of the leaf, and leaves have little pores, kind of like humans, are called stomata. And so when those stomata are open early in the evening and later in the afternoon, when you apply a liquid nutrient, it can get into that stomata, and you can get that nutrient in through the stem of the leaf, into the stalk, to the plant roots within 45 minutes. So you could wait 3 weeks if you apply a granular, or you can get 45 minutes as a result of the nutrients applied. In addition, because you're adding all that air and propagating the microbiology, it's alive. It can penetrate and work itself into the tissues of the leaves and actually help to be a pest repellent. Some chewing insects don't like the flavor of compost tea, especially when you're using worm compost. There are certain sucking insects that won't lay their eggs where there's the presence of that microbiology on the leaves, so they go somewhere else and lay their eggs. So we're going to make some compost tea. If we were to take this aggregate material and put it in a burlap bag and just soak it in the water for a couple days or a week, that would be an extract. That would be anaerobic because we haven't applied air to it, and it can take up to a week. So with compost tea, we're going to do this in a 24-hour period. So to start off with, you need a little bit of equipment. Certainly a 5-gallon bucket, because it is the growing season and I need to use a lot of tea for a number of different gardens that I'm looking after. In the spring and fall, when I don't have as many crops going on, I can use a 1 or a 2-gallon bucket and make a smaller batch of tea. The next most important ingredient would be the air stone here. And this is a fish pump that I was able to scavenge off some folks that were getting rid of their fish pump. And then it has a, I do recommend the aquarium tank tubing. The standard plastic tubing you get at Home Depot really stretches out and it doesn't make a good fit, whereas this rubberized surgical type tubing is really good. Air stones you can also pick up at pet supply spots. And then we could drop that in the water and get some aeration going. This would be one that I picked up at a yard sale. It came from an actual fish tank, and so the gravel would be over the top, and then it percolates air up through the center there. And these can be purchased fairly simply, or like I say, scavenged and found. I did step up my game because I wanted some better coverage. My friend Kathy Duskin made this for me. This would be 1/4 inch soaker hose tubing with a series of T-barbs. And so the T-barbs on the ends here make the cross piece, and then the T-barbs on the outer ring there is where the surgical tubing, that aquarium tubing comes into play. These would just be rocks on wire as a weight to hold the soaker hose down at the bottom. And so you can see with my soapstone, it works perfect in a small bucket, but that's a very small column of air. And so when I actually do the soaker hose in the ring, I get a much better air penetration. And we'll plug those in here in a bit, and you can see the difference between them. So once you got your aeration equipment in place, I use a painter bag to put the compost material inside of. And I think that was about $1 at the building supply shop. It's what they put in the spray can, paint sprayers, so you're not absorbing guck and clods in that. And this is real nice because it's reusable. When I started out, I would take a piece of t-shirt or a towel and cut a square and put the compost right in the middle and then fold it up on the sides. And with my expensive technical holding tool, I can then take the compost material and attach it to the side of the tank like so. The last thing you'll need then, very simple, would be a way to apply the compost tea to the plants. So certainly, there again, when I'm doing smaller batches, nothing says you can't use a standard hand sprayer. I do recommend getting a good quality one at the building supply shops. Don't just go to cheap discount stores. You get cheap crap and they don't work. I do use a 2-gallon pump sprayer. Because I can pressurize it, and then it has a wand. I like that it all comes apart, all of the fittings come apart, and I can clean the whole thing out really well. It does come with a variety of spray attachments, but I only use the sprayer, and I can set it to make large droplets for soil applications when there's not a lot of plant growth, and I can set it real fine as a mist, and with that angle I can get up under the leaves, over the top of the leaves, cover the entire plant really well. 2-gallon is about the biggest I recommend. I've used a 3-gallon before and it's quite heavy. At that point I would go with a pack sprayer if you have a lot of coverage or if you have fruit trees. I do my entire garden, all my landscaping, my trees, so I like to have the volume to not have to fill it up so often. If you're going to go with a quart size, you're going to be filling up quite a few different batches of tea. The other ingredient then that I want to cover real quick here, this would be the water component. Prime ingredient for tea, right, is water. By the way, compost tea is meant for plants. It's not meant for human consumption. This isn't like sipping tea. This is serious application kind of stuff. So this is irrigation water. It has not been treated. If you have access to pond, river, stream water, I'd prefer an aerobic live water, not some swamp, with algae growing in it, of course. We have access to irrigation water here in Colorado, so it's a really handy one to use. If you're using domestic water, keep track because it either has chloramine or chlorine in it, and their whole role is to kill biology. And here we are propagating biology, and now we're running counter. We're not going to make a good tea. So if all you have is domestic water, put it in a series of small buckets and let it sit out for maybe 4 or 5 days. The more surface area you can give it, the better. The more UV exposure you can give it, the better you can break that down. They do have a half-life. They will break down, but it takes considerable time. So in the wintertime, when all I have available is domestic water, I'll set out a series of buckets one weekend, and then the next weekend use that water to make the tea with. All right, let's head on to the next step. Just a little comment about the compost here. Number one most important ingredient in the compost tea would be a disease-free, verified, clean compost. We would not want to take raw manure and make tea and propagate with air bubbles and make bad mojo for our plants. I really like worm compost as opposed to regular compost because we know worm compost has a lot of plant growth hormones as well as all the NPK and trace nutrients, minerals, trace elements. So in your compost it should smell nice and earthy. Those of you that have watched the compost video know that in quality compost you've aerated it very well, so it's a good aerobic compost. You've kept the moisture appropriate so that you've propagated all the microbiology, and you've let it cured and finish so that it has that good earthy, crumbly smell, and you're not identifying the parent material in old banana peels and sludge and whatnot. You can also buy compost. Certainly you can pick up packaged compost at a number of different garden centers or even online, but I really recommend using a good quality compost. For the recipe that I like to use, you can go to a variety of resources and different people give you different recommendations. Somewhere between a quart to a gallon is the amount of compost to use. There again, I'm basing this on a 5-gallon bucket. So in my 5-gallon bucket, I'm going to use the full gallon quantity size of compost. So I'm going to go ahead and pour that in to the bag here. Those of you that also caught the Colorado Biodynamic Hemp video, Rory made real good mention of a nice way to get some native microbiology into your soil profile. I got a little too much compost, so I'm going to pour a little bit of this back. There we go. I went up to the Uncompahgre Plateau last weekend, and about 7,200 feet I was able to pick up some nice native soil. And so I'm going to throw a little bit of that in here. I've got about a cup worth that I want to put in, and that'll introduce some good native bacteria fungi that is popular in our ecosystem anyway, so hopefully I get more of that going in my garden. One of the nifty plant physiology tricks there, kelp is a real nifty nutrient that we use in gardening, but kelp can actually relax the stomata of the leaves. It's a diaphoretic, so it allows them to relax, and the longer that stomata is open, the more it's open, the more tea we can get into the plant. So about a tablespoon of kelp is appropriate to get that diaphoretic action. Now, having said that, depending on the time of year and what you have in mind for your crop production, if it's early in the season and you'd like to get a lot of nitrogen to your crops, you could certainly put a nitrogen fertilizer in here as well. So you could add in some blood meal or some feather meal or something of that nature. If you're later in the season and everything is flowering and fruiting, go crazy on the phosphorus. Get some bat guano in there or other phosphorus sources. You can nudge your tea in a direction of nutrients based on your plant needs. Because I have some plants that are in vegetative growth and some that are starting to flower and some that are getting ready to fruit, I'd rather make a straight bucket, and then in my tea brewer I can add in the blood meal or the bat guano where it's crop appropriate and do a gallon batch of a specialized tea, just for that crop. So back to our regular batch of compost tea. Here's our approximate gallon size of compost. We add a little bit of native soil and just that little bit of kelp. We'll pop this dude down here. Oh, one small step would be the aerator. We'll get that going here. Wanted to just show you real quick on the aerator. Again, that single soapstone will definitely work. And you can see it there putting out some nice bubbles. And if you place it right in the middle of the bucket, it will work, and it makes a fine tea. It's that aerobic action that is the catalyst that makes the tea healthy and beneficial for your crops. But like I say, I really wanted to go bourgeois with it and get some real fluff going. So I stepped up my game and actually picked up the dual port fish pump. And set that dude down in now and have a look comparison at the amount of air bubbles coming up. I just set those rocks in there and look at that. Now I'm getting some nice agitation. The water's moving really well. So again, our tea is ready to go here. Our compost is ready to go into the tea, and our high-tech security device there to keep it in place. And our last ingredient would be the catalyst. I'm a fan of using blackstrap molasses. This is an organic version here. Molasses can feed both the bacteria and the fungus. If you're just after the bacteria growth, because you've got a lot of vegetables that crave that bacteria, you can use some oatmeal. Hang on a second. Sorry, for bacteria, it's all sugars. Cane sugar, the beet sugar, maple syrup actually will work as well. If you want to propagate more of the fungus, you can use oatmeal or yucca. Molasses, fish emulsion, and sometimes kelp can stimulate both the bacteria and the fungus. And I'm looking for a full spectrum here. So for a recipe, depending on the source you're going to, I've seen a teaspoon and I've seen a quarter cup. So I'm going to shoot for about a tablespoon here. And this is just some straight up sugar just to feed that microbiology and just jumpstart it and get it activated. You can certainly go to specialty shops or online. You can find catalysts that you can spend considerable money on. And some of those microbes are really handy for your crop production. If you have a crop that's craving a certain type of mycorrhizae or a certain type of bacteria that really helps it flourish, then you can go out online and find those specific types of bacteria, those specific types of fungus, and then add them to your tea. What we were doing instead was adding some of our native soil with some of the native microbiology. But certainly you can add all sorts of different local plants. If you're looking for some silica in your plants, horsetail. We have native horsetail just growing crazy all around here. You can get into oak, dandelions, stinging nettles. Each crop has different types of nutrients that can be added in with your compost right in the bag. So this really does become a low-cost, effective way to make a dynamite nutrient for your plants that absorbs quickly and provides microbiology to aid in organic matter decomposition, plant health, overall plant vitality, as well as some pest control too. So we'll come back and have a look at this a little bit later and start seeing what we're getting in the way of some activity here, hopefully. And here at the 14-hour mark, we have some good bubbles coming up. As the microbiology multiplies and respires, they put out carbon dioxide, and that comes off in the form of bubbles, and that's that beautiful looking root beer float looking bubbles that we know we have an alive batch of tea. Well, we're just over the 24-hour mark, and we have tea. If you have a look here, we've got some real nice bubbles. It's a real good looking batch of tea. The true litmus test would be to unplug the pump and let it sit for about 10 seconds. Obviously now we're not capturing any of the water bubbles, but the actual respiration of the microbiology. And that's all carbon dioxide there around the edges and all the smaller bubbles there. And we're past the 10-second mark now, and there's still bubbles present, so it is alive. It is happening. That is a beautiful, rich color. We made a nice batch of tea here. So I'm going to remove my high-tech tea bag here, and this can go right back in the compost pile. You can put it out in the garden soil as well. Still has a lot of good organic matter to it. And now in my pump sprayer here, having a 2-gallon pump sprayer, I'm at 1.5 gallons of irrigation water. So that is untreated, unchlorinated water. Again, because we don't want to kill the microbiology we've propagated. And a good ratio is 25% tea. And, you know, there's varying reports, and if you're battling different diseases, you can get up to a 33%. For germinating seeds, you can get down to a 1 to 5% compost tea. So that's 95 ounces of water to 1 ounce of compost tea. So again, that little bucket, that little 1-gallon bucket that I do in the wintertime, it goes a long way. So at a 25% ratio, a 5-gallon bucket means I've now got 20 gallons of compost tea to apply, and that's at a 25%. I could cut it back to 10% and get 100 gallons out of it, or 50 gallons out of it if I'd like, or more. I'm not doing math, I'm making tea. So I'm going to pour this on into the old container up to that fill mark there. And now I know I'm at 25% tea and 75% water. But wait, there's more. A real good idea to do a surfactant. This was a fairly expensive product. I think it was about $10 for this little bottle. It's pretty high tech with coconut oil in it. Surfactant helps the liquid adhere to what it's applied to. It helps the water to ball up in little beads. If you've ever done that windshield treatment and then water hits your window and it beads up, well, we want that same action on the plants, because if we just apply this basically water with the tea added, of course, if we apply that to the plant leaves, a lot of times it sheets off and it drips away and it doesn't get that absorption through the stomata. So when we put a wetting agent on it, it allows the water to cling better, and it gives it a better staying power, so it sits on the leaf for a longer period of time, and that allows a better absorption into the leaf stomata. Being cheap, I am a fan of a good liquid soap. I'm a fan of Dr. Bonner's because they use hemp in their soap. It's not antibacterial soap. Got to watch that, right? Don't use antibacterial dish soap. However, any liquid soap will work as long as it's not antibacterial. So 1/4 teaspoon per gallon. Not much. You're literally talking about drops is all you need. And you'll note I'm adding the soap after I put the liquid in so I don't have this volcano of soap foam coming out. So in my always high-tech method, there's a 1/4 teaspoon and there's a 1/4 teaspoon. And that's all I need in that one. So now I can go ahead and get this dude pumped up and let's go apply some compost tea. So we're out in my garden now to do a little compost tea application. As I mentioned earlier, this could be a real good time that you could add in a little bit of liquid kelp or a little liquid fish emulsion, any sort of nutrients that you'd like to give some nutrients specific to that crop. I'm a little bit challenged here because I'm in the early growth stages. I've got some fruiting tomatoes and eggplant. I've got some vegetative horehound that I'm growing for the leaf, and I've got some astragalus that I'm growing for the roots. So I've got a whole different mishmash. So this is just a general batch of tea and just a straight up tea that we saw in the video there. So the goal then would be to come out either early in the morning or later in the afternoon, because that's when those stomata are fully relaxed. So you'd like to have a high humidity if you can. You get a better absorption, but if it's dry, that's the way it goes. Not a good idea to do it if it's really windy, because you get a lot of evaporation before it absorbs into the leaf. You can, blow the mist right by the plants on occasion. I like the evening time because we're finding that the UV rays in the morning can cook out some of the microbiology during the day. So I've switched over to evening applications. So it's just pretty straightforward that, again, there's stomata on top of the leaves and under the leaves. And you'll see that I'm really aggressively coating these plants so they're just dripping with compost tea, which is okay because that's going right to the soil. So I'm adding a little bit of nutrients onto the soil, but I'm also really coating these plants so that any chewing insects don't want to be around, and certainly any sucking insects want to go somewhere else as well, which is just fine with me. And then I get up on a ladder and I hit up my trees in the backyard. I do all my raspberries. I do my house plants. Sometimes I'll sneak over the neighbors and hit their plants too when I have some extra tea. Just everything gets a real nice even coating, and I'm a real fan of doing compost tea about once every 3 weeks. When I was in production, I was aiming for every 10 days, and any more than that you can be a detriment to the plants. So somewhere around that 10-day to 3-week window is a real nice time frame. I've got a bit of Dutch elm disease in the neighborhood, and I've got a couple trees in the backyard that I'm kind of nervous about, so I've been hitting them with the compost tea spray now for a number of years, and all my neighbors have the Dutch elm disease and I don't. So I think what I'm doing is effective in making a difference. Yeah, super cheap, super easy, super effective, multitude of purposes, good organic way to grow food. Have some healthy plants, make some healthy food, makes you healthy too. We'll do some more videos later on. See ya.